So, whenever the fact that I am indeed a feminist comes up in discussion, someone will ultimately start freaking out and begin assuming entire aspects of my identity from this without any prior mention of said aspects. It's almost a given. It's almost a unwritten law of the universe.
Imagine that. Imagine that when you give yourself a label, that people assume that you represent that label. That's almost like saying, whenever I say Republican, people assume all sorts of things about me and what I stand for without really knowing me. Well, yes, that's because you took on this label.
The fact is that I'm not that simple. My feminism is not a shopping list of doctrine and authorities. So what is my type of feminism?
Again, if a Republican, or if somebody came up to me and said, I'm a Republican, but I'm not, my Republicanism isn't a shopping list of dogmas and assertions and things that I believe, I would question why you have that label. I'm an atheist, and I'm a very proud atheist. I'm an atheist to the point where I own a scarlet letter that I wear on my suit to work. And I don't care. And I wear that letter for the very reason that I understand what having the label of atheist means. I understand that it means that people will judge me in this baby-eating, horrible person kind of way. And I do it proudly. So I wear the label on my shirt, on my jacket. I wear it proudly so that people know that I understand what the label means and that I don't care what that label means because it's it's not necessarily true. And that's part of the whole coming out atheist movement, and that's part of the whole Scarlet Letter thing. So I bring this up because I find it funny that you should know this. You should know that having the feminist label will bring in negative connotations to you, and yet you seem surprised that it does, or bewildered that people give you, stereotype you as a feminist when you say you're a feminist. It's almost this like, well, of course they will. We do that about every label group that we have. We do that about Republicans and Democrats and liberals and conservatives and you name it. We will do that. So I don't understand why this surprises you.
Well, I perceive feminism in much the same way that I do secularism, a political movement founded around a general goal. With feminism, this is gender equality. With secularism, this is religious equality. Now, I know what you're going to say. But EOT, what about the radical feminists? Well, what about it? Just as groups such as secular Stalinists have taken and perverted secularism in their own fashion, so do some people who hold to the title feminist. Now, secularism is equality in that freedom of religion is entirely dependent on freedom from religion. If the state and even society's general culture has the right to impose religion upon the individual, a person loses their liberty of religion, which includes the right not to hold a religion. Yet some secular movements, such as various forms of secular Stalinism, take the stance that not only should religion be banned from its governmental and cultural control, but also altogether. Yes, historically Stalinism then switched to hypocritically utilise the church, but I'm merely trying to present a point, which is that a noble cause can be corrupted, but to declare that invalidates the original goal is guilt by association, which I don't buy from a theist or an anti-feminist. All rather simple. It irritates me a great deal when people associate me with TJ, also known as the Amazing Atheist. He rather simply is an intellectual hack whose only excuse for his active quote mining of sources is that he's mainly there for entertainment. That still doesn't stop a lie being a lie when you present it in attempts to rebut a position. TJ is dishonest, Thus, I disassociate from him like I do with Anita Sarkeesian. Her media analysis is rather shoddy and her conclusions oftentimes nuke the fridge. I have no dogma, I have no authorities. Yes, there are large names under feminism, just like secularism. These are people who have become insanely popular for whatever reason, honest or dishonest. That does not then make them my emperor. I have no masters, I have no loyalties.
So my problem with what you're saying here is that you both want to have your cake and eat it too. You want to be an individual. You want to be somebody who's independent, thinks independently, doesn't follow dogma, doesn't have somebody dictating to them what to do. And yet, you also want to be part of a group that does have a dogma, that does have somebody dictating you what to do, and does prescribe thinking to you. You want to have it both ways when you really can't. People like Anita Sarkeesian do, in fact, inform the decisions of other feminists. It is one of the reasons why she is so disliked by those of us who dislike her, isn't just for the things that she says, it's also because of the huge influence she has among feminists. And so, while it might work for you as an individual, that doesn't mean that it is necessarily true for the whole group. Because you see this sheep-like mentality among feminists where they do follow everything that Anita Sarkeesian says, they do follow everything that Jessica Valenti says, and they do it unquestionably. So let me tell you a story here. I had a friend, and a Christian friend of mine, and we would often talk about atheism and Christianity, and one of the things that we talked about was that he was, in fact, he was a sexually active individual, out of marriage. And then one day, the conversation of abortion came up. His take on abortion was he was against it because it was in his Bible to be against it. I then also pointed out that it is also in his Bible to be against sex outside of marriage. And he came up with this pretty much the same excuse you are. Well, I know, but I don't really follow that one, or I don't really do that one myself. And it's this cherry picking that has always been so wrong with religion and Christianity is, well, I shouldn't say what is so wrong, but it is one of the things that makes you understand that it is such a false view, is that you can cherry pick what you want to have or what you don't want to have. I also think you vastly simplify feminism to something that is almost meaningless. This idea of being, for gender equality. That's not all that feminism is. And I get the feeling that you know this, because feminism does encompass more than that. It's why you have people like Anita Sarkeesian talk about patriarchy and talk about privilege and white privilege and cis privilege and this vilification of men. There's so much more to it, and you simplify it. And I think you do it so that you can cherry pick without seeming like you're cherry picking. Because when you simplify it to that way, nobody can then call you out and be like, well, you're only cherry picking the things that you like from feminism and ignoring the bad things about feminism. And I think you're doing that, but you're doing it you're cherry picking this idea of I like gender equality, but I'm going to ignore all the bad things about it. And maybe ignore isn't quite the right word to use here, because you do acknowledge the bad things, but you dismiss them as those are just some radicals. And it's not just some radicals, and I'm going to point this out because you're going to say this something later on. It's not just some radicals. There are more than just some of these people. There's a reason Anita Sarkeesian is so popular, and it's not because there are a few radicals that follow her. It is because there is a massive following for this woman.
That is why I direct traffic towards Captain McCall's videos on the male victims of genital mutilation, domestic abuse, and rape. I do not have a war on cis heterosexual men. I just understand historically that they have had a privileged position, which I would say is still maintained overall in contemporary society. This is why I am not giving up the word feminism, its history as well as its global structure.
Now, I'm going to call you out on two things here. It's the history and the cis white privilege thing. The problem with feminism always pushing this idea of cis white privilege is that it does what I think you don't want it to do, which is it lumps all white straight people together and assumes that all of them are privileged. That is sexist and that is racist. That bottom line, that is what it is. Just because you are white and just because you are straight does not make you be off in a better position than someone else. You are entirely looking at a group and defining them by their color of their skin and their gender. Not even their gender, their sexual orientation. This is no different than doing the opposite and saying making assumptions about black men, black women, black gays. You're doing the exact same thing, but somehow you feel that it's appropriate when you say something like, I'm just saying they are privileged. It's not. You're still doing the same wrong. You're still stereotyping, and you're still, without taking into account their individual stories, assuming something about them. The other thing to keep in mind is this historical idea that you keep it for this historical idea of feminism. And this is something that I bring up to people is Republicans were the ones to free slaves. That doesn't mean that you should be a Republican at all. Historically, Republicans have done some good things. Historically, Republicans have done some bad things. Some can be said with Democrats. We cannot, political movements change over time.
But talking about its global structure, some people argue that feminism is at the very least dead in the West. Now, I disagree with this, as hopefully has been highlighted before, but these same people often declare themselves to be humanists. Now, as a humanist also, because I'm not restricted to a single title of identity, I am not a nationalist. I see people in countries and my concerns do not stop at the borders of those countries. That is what being a humanist is about.
Here's why you're wrong about your little analogy. I'm a humanist, and I agree with you on this idea of how our sympathy and our attention should not be bound by borders. However, that's not what people are saying when they say that feminism is dead in the West. When we say that feminism is dead in the West, we say that we no longer need feminism in the West. That something like egalitarianism or something like humanism will suffice in the West. People like me, which I don't necessarily speak for all anti-feminists, but some people like me are even willing to say that if I was in a different country, say Saudi Arabia or another Middle Eastern country, that I would potentially back up feminism in those countries. So it's not to say that feminism must only be contained within the country that they are, but that within the context of that country, it is no longer needed.
These are all matters I care about. But when it comes to feminism, we suddenly change as, oh no, we can't display international solidarity. No, we can't even say the F word or discuss topics even remotely related to that word, as apparently it offends too many people. It's amazing what people will do just to try and stop me talking about feminism. Fact is that I'm not going to be bent by a little bad language, and I give as good as I get, sometimes even worse.
So nobody is gonna stop you from talking about issues like female or male genital mutilation, or um, things like abortion rights, or self-body rights, or bodily integrity, or any of these particular issues on their own. No one's going to stop you from talking about those. Hell, no one's really going to stop you about talking about feminism. What you are seeing is people not liking the fact that you are okay talking about it from a feminism perspective. And honestly, I don't necessarily agree that people should stop you or try to bully you into not talking about it. It might even be, honestly, a knee-jerk reaction to you saying that you're a feminist. But the thing is, that something that you must understand is that feminists have been known to do this, as we have seen in Canada, where feminists have done things like pull fire alarms to stop MRA conventions, or in similar fashions have been done. And feminists talking about not wanting to have safe spaces for men to talk because the feminist spaces should be good enough.
Suicide statistics, workplace injuries, men not having access to their children, all these things are organizing around are largely legitimate things, but they fail to make the connection that feminism, like they are symptoms of patriarchy, and feminism is already working to address these things, that, women are better caretakers than men, so men don't have access to their children. Right?
And so when you have feminists doing this, the automatic reaction from a lot of us is to say, it is to knee-jerk in that same way that feminists knee-jerk. And it is a knee-jerk reaction to not necessarily try to shut you up, but to attack you when you say it. And it is because that is the kind of things that we face when we try to talk about men's issues. So it's a knee-jerk in response to the knee-jerks that feminism give us.
Racist, sexist, anti-gay, MRA, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay, MRA, go away!
They took a poll in England of women, and 70% of them didn't want the vote. They thought...
I know, and the women in Saudi Arabia want the burqa. I know, it's because of the culture that they grew up in. Karen, give me a thank you. Look, everything's going great, but you're not being reasonable. You're being ridiculous. Give me a thank you. Give me a thank you for feminists for getting your right to vote. Otherwise, stop voting and go make me a ham sandwich.
If I wanted to display my meeting of feminism and secularism, I'd utilize the title of Secular Feminist. This is a movement that actually exists and is vital in tackling sexism propagated by religion in particular, and especially with Islam and Hinduism in the East. That is needed. It is very important. But even then, I do not demand that you take on that title. If you don't want to identify as feminist, then fine.
You might not. You might not demand that people take on the title of feminism. And that's, again, this I'm going back to this idea that you, and I understand that you even named this video My Brand of Feminism, but you're still associating yourself with the kinds of feminists who do say things like Lacey Green's, if you believe in equality, you're a feminist. Or even Emma Watson, who says very similar things.
It is. I think men think it's a women's word, that it's only women, it's only for women. But it really just means that you believe in equality. And if you stand for equality, then You're a feminist. Sorry to tell you. You're a feminist. I'm sorry. You're a feminist.
That they do want to force this label on people. And so a lot of the reactions that you are getting aren't necessarily aimed at you per se, but are aimed at the feminists who we hear constantly try to force the label of feminism and everyone else, regardless of whether they want to take it on or not.
I won't attack you because of this, or for whatever title you do want to use. This is so long as you extend me the same understanding. Mentioning Captain McCall once more, he does not identify as a feminist. He doesn't really identify as anything. That still does not stop us being friends and working together as we hold a mutual respect. Now, when it comes to most MRAs, this respect is oftentimes lacking. See, they claim to be for men's rights, yet the vast majority spend their entirety attacking or attempting to poison the well of feminism. Men's rights are not at risk from feminism, and thus will not be found in fighting feminism. Ergo, the MRAs typically present a false position.
You are wrong in so many ways here. This is actually probably the reason that I wanted to make this response for this statement alone. Because in the same video in which you are complaining about people generalizing feminism thoughts and lumping you together with people like TJ, and how wrong it is for people to lump you with radical feminists and lump you with radical atheists, you yourself lump together all MRAs. Well, maybe not all, because you use that weasel word of most. But you still did it. You are doing the exact same thing that you are complaining about people doing to you.
Much like Hamza Tortsius in his self-presentation as a man of intellectual capability, the claim fails to match the actions, and when someone presents themselves in such a false manner, it can only leave me lacking respect for them. If the MRAs want any damned respect from me, then they need to get off their lazy backsides and do what the non-associating individuals, such as Captain McCall, are doing in raising awareness and seeking to tackle actual issues faced by male victims, not fictional ones.
I'm going to stick in here a whole bunch of things for you to see about what MRAs do to help men. And I hope that you learn not to stereotype and not to group everyone together in the same way that you are being grouped together with radical feminists and radical atheists.
I've been separated for 3 years. I have 4 kids, and I only see them 2 hours every 2 weeks. I'm trying to get to see them more often, but I can't fight in court. I don't have any money, so the minute I got separated, I pretty much lost my kid. I didn't have enough money to rent an apartment.
Jason lost his house, his car, his job, and his ties to his church to move closer to his children.
Basically, it was my bed before I found the trailer, so it was a bit small.
The worst thing you can do is to take any destabilizing atmosphere that the child is in and magnify that destabilization by taking the child away from one of its parents. When a child is experiencing divorce, a destabilizing atmosphere, verbal violence, and even physical violence, the most important thing it needs is both parents, especially unless one of those parents is directly abusive to that child.
I personally have known many people who have committed suicide over divorce. Just last week, I'm in the union, I'm chief shop steward. One of my shop stewards drove himself into a tree over divorce.
This is what motivates suicide. When you feel like there's nobody that loves you, there's nobody that needs you, there's no hope of that changing, and you don't have good skills at communicating your emotions and somebody you feel will really listen to you empathetically. When those 4 things combine, then men are prime candidates for suicide.
Society's on your side anyway, so suck it up.
Boys are most likely to be deprived of their needs and education, most likely to be homeless, most likely to get cancer, most likely to die young and of every major cause, most likely to be victims of war and domestic violence, most likely to be arrested, prosecuted, imprisoned, and even executed while being completely innocent.
What exactly is men's rights? What does that mean?
There are certain issues where men's rights are sort of routinely violated, at least on as far as an equality basis. There are certain situations men can find themselves in where they have essentially no due process, particularly domestic violence and sexual assault cases, where you can be put in jail without any kind of due process at all, or you can be kept from your home. And those types of things, while the laws tend to be gender neutral, they do disproportionately affect men.
This is what men's rights movements and men's rights activists are doing. So the next time that you want to say that they need to get off their lazy asses to do something, I think you need to get off of yours and research what they are actually doing. And they're not just doing this. They're doing this while feminists are yelling at them that they are racist, homophobes, and sexist. While you have other feminists yelling down at them that they should be thankful for feminism. So how about next time, before you start throwing judgment around at people, you take a hard look at what you're doing, grouping people together and then getting pissed that you get grouped in with other people.